Hello again. Today we are going to talk about outliers, what they are and how to identify them. So let's get started. An outlier is, informally, it's just a number that is so far removed from the rest of the data. It's just kind of out there. Statistically, how to find it is you find one of your quartiles and then you go 1.5 times the interquartile range beyond that. So you would want an upper boundary of the upper quartile, which is Q3, but to that we are going to add 1.5 times the interquartile range, and that will be our upper boundary. For the lower boundary, we're going to take the lower quartile, which we call Q1, and we're going to subtract 1.5 times the interquartile range, and that will be our lower boundary. Anything that is beyond either one of those boundaries is going to be an outlier. So here's an example. I have this data set right here. Well, I really can't find the median or the quartiles or the interquartile range until that data has been sorted. So let's sort that, and now it is in order from least to greatest. So I look for the middle number, and that is 11. That is going to be my median, and that separates the list into an upper half and a lower half. So the median of the lower half is going to be the average of 8 and 9, which is 8.5. And the median of the upper half is going to be the average of 16 and 16, which is 16. So my upper quartile is 16. My interquartile range is going to be the difference between the upper quartile and the lower quartile, which is 16 minus 8.5 or 7.5. So now I have everything I need to figure out what my boundaries are to find any outliers. The upper boundary is going to be my upper quartile, 16, plus 1.5 times my interquartile range of 7.5. And that ends up being 27.25. My lower boundary is going to be my lower quartile of 8.5 minus 1.5 times 7.5, and that's going to give me negative 2.75. So anything that is above 27.25 and anything that is below negative 2.75 is going to be considered an outlier. Well, if I look at my list, I don't have any numbers that are negative, so I certainly don't have any numbers that are less than negative 2.75. But I do have one number that is larger than 27.25, and that's the 28 at the end of the list. So I will consider that to be an outlier. Here's another example where I have a chart instead of a list of data, but I can still figure out what I need to. So there are 17 numbers in the list if I add up all of the frequencies. So that means that the median is going to be the 9th number in the list. Okay, so I'm basically just counting off each of the responses. They are sorted. I just need to read the chart from left to right. So the first person gave a response of 1. The second, third, and fourth person gave a response of 4. And the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th person all gave a response of 5. So all I care about is the 9th response, and that is 5. So the lower quartile is going to be the average of the 4th and the 5th numbers, because that's the lower half, is the 1st through the 8th number. That is the lower half of the numbers. So the average, or the lower quartile, is going to be the average of the 4th and 5th numbers. I already have those labeled. The 4th response was 4, the 5th response was 5, so the average of those is going to be 4.5. And then if I look at the highest 8 numbers, then the median of that is going to be the average of the 13th and 14th response. Well, I haven't identified those, so I'm going to keep going. And so the 13th response and the 14th response were both 6s, so the upper quartile is also going to be 6. So now I have my median, my lower quartile, and my upper quartile, and all I need is my interquartile range. So my interquartile range is going to be Q3, which is 6, minus Q1, which is 4.5. That gives me 1.5 as my interquartile range. So my upper boundary is going to be my upper quartile of 6 plus 1.5 times the interquartile range, which is 1.5, and that gives me 8.25. My lower boundary is going to be my lower quartile of 4.5 minus 1.5 times the interquartile range of 1.5, and that gives me 2.25. So any number in my list, any response that is higher than 8.25 or lower than 2.25 is going to be an outlier. So I have two of them. I have 10, which is the highest number. That's bigger than 8.25. And I have a response of 1. That's lower than 2.25. So both of those are outliers. So that's a quick way to identify any outliers that are in a list of numbers by calculating the median, the quartiles, and the interquartile range. If you have any questions about that, please let me know, and I will see you tomorrow.